Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural ESG Academy webinar series, Creating Value with Board Diversity. This is Chloe Chen from HKEX. I am honored to be your MC for the event. Throughout the webinar, you may select traditional Chinese or simplified Chinese in the top right corner of the webinar page for simultaneous interpretation in 普通话. Today, we are proud to launch HKEX ESG Academy webinar series as part of our ongoing commitment to deepening ESG understanding and knowledge among listed issuers and the wider business community. The webinar series will discuss different topics in the evolving ESG landscape, helping issuers to better integrate ESG considerations into their business decision-making process. Succeeding in a post-COVID world requires new ideas and leadership. Diversity in the boardroom helps prevent groupthink. Today, we are delighted to invite leading practitioners to share their insights on how diversity supports better business, better risk management, and value creation. To kick off today's program, we are honored to have Mrs. Laura M. Cha, Chairman of HKEX, to give us her welcome remarks. Mrs. Cha, please.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the inaugural HKEX ESG Academy webinar. I'm very excited to launch the latest HKEX initiative promoting environmental, social, and governance standards. Companies around the globe are increasingly recognizing that ESG must be measured, reported, and taken into consideration in formulating and executing their business strategies. Companies increasingly understand that this is essential in building long-term sustainable success. COVID has served as a wake-up call, and now talk has to be turned into action. At the same time, demand for investments that meet recognized ESG standards is growing rapidly around the globe. The business case for ESG strategy is becoming stronger and stronger. And this year, with international leaders' renewed commitment on climate, including mainland China's pledge to be carbon neutral by 2060 and the Hong Kong government's by 2050, we are expecting more public-private collaboration, which will all create real opportunities for companies placing ESG and sustainability at the heart of their business. The journey has just begun, but is picking up speed. ESG performance has become not only the proxy of corporate resilience and risk management capabilities, it also demonstrates and enhances the long-term value of the business. HKEX, sitting at the heart of Asia's global financial market, is a major force in driving and facilitating the global sustainability journey. As an international exchange operator, as a market regulator, and as a public company, we see ourselves as a change agent. We seek to lead by example, promoting sustainability across our business operations and markets. As a frontline regulator of more than 2,500 companies, HKEX plays a vital role in promoting a culture of good corporate governance and ESG management. We seek to provide our markets with a framework and clear guidance for ESG disclosure, application, and implementation. We do this through listing regulations, rules, and education. HKEX first introduced ESG disclosure requirement back in 2013. And since then, we have continued to upgrade the disclosure obligations of listed companies. Last year, we revised our ESG guide to reinforce board commitment on ESG matters by introducing mandatory disclosure requirements to include a board statement setting out the board's consideration of ESG matters. I'm very proud that HKEX is one of the few exchanges and regulators in the world elevating ESG consideration to a boardroom conversation. This reflects our fundamental belief that sustainability is an integral part of long-term business strategy, and it is the responsibility of a company's board to ensure that the subject is being taken seriously by the management. Besides rules and regulation, we are also committed to helping companies take the next step, from measuring to managing their ESG goals. We will provide ongoing guidance and training to our listed issuers. In December, we issue an industry best practice, making inroads into good governance and ESG management. The ESG Academy we are launching today aims to guide and educate issuers and the broader business community in their sustainability journey and help them implement change for real impact. Our ESG Academy will be a centralized ESG education platform to help listed companies start, plan, and manage their ESG strategy. It will include the latest reporting requirements and guidance material, webinar, and other ESG resources to help companies build their own long-term sustainability strategies. It will deepen understanding of the importance of ESG consideration among issuers and the wider business community, and facilitates ESG consideration as part of business decision-making process. The topic of today's live webinar is board diversity. This is a timely topic, given we have recently published a consultation paper that proposes companies take more and direct action on improving diversity within their boards and across their workforce. Our head of listing, Bonnie Chan, will share more details of that consultation with you later today. As a market regulator, we've been very focused on diversity for some time. Recently, in 2019, we revised our rules to require listed companies to make additional disclosure on board diversity, including gender, and setting out the requirements of single-gender boards in order to effect change. Diversity makes good business sense. A diverse company is naturally more innovative, intuitive, and resilient. It is better at managing risks, and it helps to avoid groupthink. Diversity improves how a company listens to customers and other stakeholders. It also helps attract and retain talent, particularly the next generation of leaders. Diversity and ESG are becoming an increasingly important factor when investors make their investment decisions. These were not mainstream considerations as little as a decade ago, but they are now front and center. Promoting diversity and inclusion is a personal passion of mine. I believe that boardroom diversity is a cornerstone of good corporate governance and sound business decisions. Having a diverse set of competencies and resources at the board level helps businesses successfully to adapt to today's fast-changing world. Having a diverse board also helps board members themselves experience and embrace diversity, which ultimately enables diversity to permeate through business and society as the norm. And this, I believe, is one of the most powerful opportunities for businesses. As a company, we seek to lead by example. More than 40% of HKEX staff are women, and they make up 35% of our senior management, including the female chairs of subsidiaries, and along with representatives on our group management team, including head of listing, our CFO, head of post-trade, head of corporate communication, etc. By promoting diversity within our organization, by offering advocacy and training programs to our employees, as well as setting new rules and standards as a regulator, we will enhance listed company board diversity and corporate governance. We are committed to championing and facilitating the company diversity journey. Our goal is to help create a truly open, vibrant, innovative, and resilient environment for the long-term and sustainable growth. The launch of today's ESG Academy is our latest initiative in promoting sustainability. It will complement STAGE, our sustainable and green exchange platform, where issuers can go beyond their regulatory requirements to provide enhanced transparency in sustainable investment products. It will sit alongside our other programs and campaigns in this space. This is important for business, for performance, for our communities, and for the planet. I know that this afternoon's discussion, led by some of the leading ESG practitioners in Hong Kong, will provide you with some valuable insight into your own ESG journey, specifically on diversity. And so, please do enjoy the session. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chia. Now, please welcome Ms. Bonnie Y-Chen, Head of Listing, HKEX. Today, Bonnie will talk about why diversity is critical for board effectiveness, the latest developments and best practices for listed companies, and insights on the Corporate Governance Code consultation that has recently been launched. Bonnie, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of my speech today is the future for boardroom diversity. Why do I pick this as a topic? I think echoing what Laura's just said in her opening remarks, we all understand that diversity is an important driver of boards' effectiveness. Indeed, a lot of research has been done on the topic. This shows the McKinsey 2020 report on diversity, and we can see that companies that do better in gender and ethnicity diversity are found to be 25% and 36% more likely to outperform their peers. Now, at the HKEX, we do value diversity, and it is one of our 5 core corporate values. We believe diversity is a critical component of business success and long-term sustainability. It is crucial for resiliency and prosperity of our society, and therefore we are committed to do the vocal advocacy of diversity in all that we do. Now, the unprecedented challenges we experienced during COVID-19 has highlighted the importance of board effectiveness. It has thrown boardrooms into crisis mode very often. The social and economic challenges posed by COVID-19 have emphasized the true value of identifying a business strengths and weaknesses. Enshrining diversity principles in business strategy makes a company more agile and better prepared to deal with sudden changes, whether that is broken supply chains or the immediate needs for employees to work from home. It is important for issuers to truly appreciate the value of integrating diversity into their strategies and their operations. Although companies nowadays seem to widely accept the importance of a diverse board, they may not be as good in articulating their commitment on diversity. This is where I think we, as a regulator, can step in to help. Now, our role as a regulator does not stop with simply coming up with the requirements. We appreciate the need to provide assistance to the issuers with the ultimate goal to achieve a high standard of corporate governance. Therefore, we have been providing various guidance to issuers using different means. Now, here's our journey so far. Again, as a regulator, we are acutely aware that we set the example and we guide more than 2,500 listed companies on our exchange. So we introduced diversity requirements around 8 years ago, in 2013, and we have been modifying and updating these requirements periodically in accordance with international developments and market needs. So in 2013, we first introduced the concept of board diversity in our corporate governance framework. Then we went through a phase where we spent a lot of time educating. In 2017 to 2018, we launched a series of director training webcasts and e-training to highlight the importance of board diversity. And in that series, we have experience sharing by well-known female directors such as Ms. 𝗔𝗴𝗲, Ms. 𝗙𝗴𝗲, and case scenarios on board diversity issues. We also published the guidance on board and directors to provide practical advice on how to formulate board and gender diversity policies. Then in 2019, we arrived at a very important milestone. We became the first exchange in the world to require that every single listed company must have a diversity policy. We also require issuers on a comply or explain basis to state in their shareholder circular on how the proposed director contributes to diversity of the board. Our efforts also extended to listing applicants because we firmly believe that good corporate governance should be the focus of every company aspiring to become a listed company and should not be something that they only think about when they have to prepare their first corporate governance report after they have listed. Therefore, from May 2019, a listing applicant with a single gender board is required to disclose and explain in their prospectus the measures it has put in place to achieve gender diversity on its board after listing. Now, moving on to 2020, we want companies to embed diversity not only in their boards, but also at the workforce level. From July that year, issuers are required to disclose employee gender ratio in their ESG reports under our new ESG requirements. And then in December the same year, we published a report on the review of issuers' corporate governance practices. In the report, we provide guidance on how board can improve possible improvements on board diversity and directors' nomination. We also put together the Practitioners' Insights, which presents a collection of experiences shared by market practitioners. It includes a section on board diversity, which aim to help directors to think holistically about building and integrating diversity into their business strategy. Most recently, in 2021, mid-April, we launched a consultation on our corporate governance framework. Our proposals emphasize instilling changes in the mindset of issuers' boards, promoting board independence, board refreshment, and succession planning, as well as improving board diversity amongst our issuers. I will go into details later. Now, I've said a lot. So with all those efforts that the HKEX has championed, as well as efforts that others have put in, let's see the results so far. So on this slide, you would see that the MSCI's Women on Boards Progress Report 2020 is showing that women are currently still, unfortunately, underrepresented at the board level across all jurisdictions. As of November 2020, only 12.7% of Hong Kong-listed companies' directorships were held by women. It's a slight improvement from 2019, when it was at 12.4%. But I think would agree that a lot of work has to be done to further bring that number up. Now, some companies seem to fare better, but it could be because of the quota that they have imposed by law. For example, France and Norway have laws requiring that women comprise at least 40% of boards at public listed companies. California requires at least 1 to 3 female directors by the end of 2021, depending on the size of the board. Australia requires S&P ASX 300 index companies to have not less than 30% of its directors of each agenda within a specified period. So we're mindful that there is still a lot of room for improvement in Hong Kong. So let's take a look at the 2020 IPO applicants. And I've mentioned earlier that we wanted to start the work early and focus IPO applicants to think about how they can achieve the best corporate governance. So looking at that cohort, around 20% of IPO applicants listed in 2020 have single-gender boards. And what we've done, we've asked these applicants to explain measures that they've put in place to achieve gender diversity after listing. And all of them have committed to appointing at least 1 female director within 2 to 3 years after the IPO. Now, that's a promise made in 2020, and I would say that we are closely monitoring and will track whether or not they deliver on these promises. Now we look at listed issuers. At the end of last year, around 30% of the listed companies on our exchange have single-gender boards. And I've mentioned earlier, we have around we have over 2,500 listed companies on our exchange. In our review of the corporate governance practice, we found that most of the issuers have disclosed their board diversity policy, but some of them did not set any measurable objectives. We are committed to improve the situation amongst our issuers, and therefore our proposal in the recent consultation paper is to include requirements to put an end to single-gender boards among listed issuers. This is another chart to look at the statistics. So as you can see, the issue of gender diversity is more acute at the older age groups of INEDs. Now, again, I think this slide shows us that there's a lot more work to do, but at least I think if we think on the brighter side, the higher proportion of female directors at the younger age group suggests that there is a promising pipeline of female directors which we may be expecting in the coming years. And I would say that having a good pipeline, it's very important. And that is one of the thinking behind our recent consultation paper, which we launched in mid-April 2021. It is a comprehensive consultation paper on the review of corporate governance code. And we cover not just diversity, but also other topics such as board refreshment and directors' nomination. Maybe, having spent some time already on diversity, let me talk about board refreshment. So one of the proposals we have focused on long-serving INEDs, and by definition, that refers to INEDs who have served more than 9 years on the board. Now, while we appreciate that a long-serving INED has the knowledge and familiarity with the issuer, and that may bring valuable contribution to the company, we are also mindful that that INED may become too reliant or complacent with the board, as well as the management. And therefore, we have designed our proposal, which comes in 2 folds. First of all, we propose to tighten the threshold for re-election of long-serving INEDs by requiring independent shareholders' approval. Where all the INEDs on board are long-serving INEDs, the issuer will need to appoint a new INED. Back to diversity. On the diversity front, what we proposed in the consultation paper are the following. So first of all, we believe that board's responsibility does not end with a policy in place, with simply having a policy in place. It should be a continuous journey on board's agenda. We therefore require issuers to review the implementation and the effectiveness of such policies. Also, diversity should not be limited to board, but also in the workforce, including senior management. Therefore, we propose to require concrete targets and timeliness for achieving gender diversity across all levels within issuers. Finally, we aim to put an end to single-gender board, as I have alluded to earlier. We will make it clear that companies with single-gender board will not be considered to have achieved diversity. We also have plans to display board diversity-related information on the HKEX website so that we achieve greater transparency of the board and diversity information. And obviously, we can celebrate companies which have achieved a good diversity. Moving on to directors' nomination, which is another feature in our consultation paper. Now, nomination committee bears various crucial duties. For example, they are responsible to identify suitable director candidates with diverse skills, assess INED's independence, and recommend plans on succession planning. Given this importance, we propose that nomination committee shall be chaired by an INED, an independent director, and comprising of a majority of INEDs. When re-electing long-serving INEDs, issuers are already required to explain why an INED is still independent and should be re-elected. We will further strengthen that requirement by enhancing the disclosure in this regard, asking for the factors considered and the discussion by the nomination committee in arriving at such conclusions to be disclosed so that the investors can be informed. So the goal of the consultation is to drive change by putting an end to single-gender boards. And we do know that after the proposals are implemented, if we get the support, IPO applicants will not have single-gender boards going forward. Existing issuers with single-gender boards will be allowed a 3-year transition period to appoint at least one absent gender director on their boards. Now, we're mindful that that would be a pretty fundamental change in the market. In fact, it will impact more than 1/3 of the issuers which will be required to introduce new directors to their boards. However, we firmly believe that that's the right thing to do. That will improve churn of directors, promote board refreshments, and diversity. And we are mindful that it is a continuous journey. I hope that I have shown you all the efforts that we've done to date, and the consultation proposals is another big step forward in the right direction. So finally, I will end by showing this picture. On the left-hand side, this is at least my impression of how boards used to look like in the past. And on the right-hand side, this is the HKEX board today. It's more colorful, and I hope that all the boards of all our 2,500 plus companies listed on the exchange all aspire to bring more color and diversity into their boards. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Bonnie. Now, may we invite Ms. 𝗙𝗵𝗃, Regional Head of Operations, East Asia and Pacific, and Head of Office Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, International Finance Corporation, to present on Diversity in the Boardroom, a global perspective on progress, challenges, and opportunities for change. As the head of office for IFC in Hong Kong, 𝗙𝗃 is responsible for developing business and knowledge-sharing opportunities with Hong Kong-based partners and clients. She is also IFC's Regional Head of Operations, East Asia and Pacific, and is responsible for regional strategy formulation, facilitation and oversight of investment and advisory programs, fundraising efforts, and general administration. Hester, please.
Good afternoon. I wanted to thank Laura and the team at HKEX for organizing this event today. My name is 𝗙liche𝗹𝗹𝟏. I am the Regional Head of Operations for East Asia Pacific at the International Finance Corporation. And for those who are not familiar with IFC, we are part of the World Bank Group and the largest development finance institution focused on promoting sustainable and inclusive private sector growth in emerging markets globally. We have presence in over 100 countries worldwide, including a regional hub office here in Hong Kong, which serves as the base for our investment and advisory teams operating across the region. I'm honored to be here today to share IFC's perspective on the lack of diversity in boardrooms globally, why it's so important that we act quickly to change that reality, and to share IFC's experience of what works. So what do we know? And we've heard this already from Laura from Bonnie, but we know that the diversity premium is real. At this point, most of us are at least passingly familiar with the huge amount of research that's been done on the benefits of diverse teams. It's important to note that I'm referring to all kinds of diversity, including gender, which is the focus of our discussions today. There are hundreds of studies that support the business case for diversity, which can also include benefits like higher employee engagement, increased innovation, and better market reputation. The chart on the left side of the slide from a prominent series of McKinsey reports on diversity makes the case in a compelling way and shows that the most gender diverse firms are up to 25% more likely to outperform their less diverse counterparts on measures of financial performance. And then the charts next to that show actually that those impacts are even higher with aspects of ethnic diversity taken into account. Another thing that we know is that gender diverse boards correlate with better financial performance. So the correlations that I just mentioned, they exist when you just look at boards of directors, and we have a lot of data on the benefits of gender diversity on boards. This slide shows research from IFC and the Economist Intelligence Unit from a few years ago focused on economies in ASEAN, excluding China. And they show that when you have board gender diversity, you have higher return on assets and higher average return on equity. What else do we know? We know gender diverse boards correlate with better ESG performance. There's evidence linking women's representation on boards with improved compliance, better risk management, better earnings quality, and less accounting manipulation. The examples that are here are from an IFC-sponsored report on women in business leadership and their impacts on ESG performance. And the example that I've circled, which is from a study of Chinese companies, suggests that boards with at least 3 female directors have a significant and positive impact on the scale of their company's environmental impact. And this is not the same when you only have 1 or 2 women on the board. So to get the most benefit from the diversity premium, critical mass is essential. From recent examples in the market, Goldman Sachs and BlackRock have both announced requirements that investee companies or companies that they take to IPO will have to have at least 2 diverse board members. Now, this is not critical mass, and it's not applying to all markets yet, but it's an important first step. Finally, what do we know? We know global sustainability challenges are driving investment flows. We know that capital markets are being shaped today profoundly by global sustainability challenges, particularly climate change, environmental pollution, natural resource constraints, and demographic and human capital issues such as diversity, inclusion, and gender equity. These trends are already driving growth for well-positioned companies, and there are huge risks and huge opportunity costs for firms that are unable or unwilling to adapt. And this trend is only going to accelerate, particularly given the focus on green rebuild and building back better in the post-COVID environment. So knowing that diversity at the board and management level correlates with better ESG and financial performance, and that the mega trend in global financial markets is massive investment flows going towards companies that can demonstrate strong ESG performance and strong financial performance. you would think that value-creating companies with gender-diverse boards would be the norm, but this is not the case. Depending on which data you look at, women hold between 16 and 23% of board positions globally. Being in decision-making roles matters, and women hold between 2 and 5% of actual board chairs globally. The chart on the left shows variations by region, and Asia Pacific is quite low relative to other regions, with about 9% of board seats held by women and 4% of board chairs held by women. And recall, of course, that token presence is not enough, and the chart on the right shows that about 16% of companies from a Bloomberg sample have 30% of women on boards or more, and this is up from 2% in 2009. Then, to make matters worse, of course, the pandemic has reversed progress on gender equality. You've probably seen some statistics about this, the impacts of COVID-19 on women in particular, higher rates of job loss, higher rates of business closure, increased exposure to contagion, and stress levels and mental health impacts because of the sectors where they tend to be concentrated and employed. And rates of domestic and gender-based violence have skyrocketed as well. So in addition to those sobering statistics, unfortunately, there has been a global slowdown in the rate of increase for female representation on boards in 2020. So the gain was just 0.6% compared to about a 2% increase in the previous year. So it's not a time for business as usual. We certainly don't have time to go backwards, but unfortunately, if we stick to business as usual, and you see this chart from MSCI, business as usual is the dark blue line, and we can expect to get to about 30% of women on boards by 2029 if we continue at that pace. But under a deceleration scenario, which is what we've experienced now in the COVID world, is that it will take another 15 years or so, or until 2036, to reach 30%. So now consider that humanity has about until the end of this decade to take action on the climate crisis. And it may seem like a small thing, but in fact, diverse boards are proven to improve firm ESG performance and influence positive climate action. So against a very daunting challenge, this is an easy, implementable step that every company can take, and they can take right away. And it will make a real difference given the corporate sector and private sector's contribution to global emissions, both direct and indirect. So what can we do? Now, for those who don't know her or recognize her, this is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she's a prominent Nigerian intellectual who writes compellingly about gender equality. And the quote that she has here is that culture does not make people, people make culture. Why is this relevant? I think it's relevant because some of the inertia and resistance to diversifying boards leadership and company leadership in general has to do with culture, whether that's within the corporation or in the culture at large. And so the people in the audience today and those that are listening online likely fall into one of three groups. Either you are a board member yourself, part of a group or association interested in board operations, you're part of a company's senior management team, or you represent a regulator or an exchange which sets the rules for corporate behavior. So actually, those of you listening, you define the culture of the boards in the markets where you operate, and you have the ability and the responsibility to influence the shift in this culture towards one that's more inclusive and diverse for all of the reasons that I mentioned. So just a few quick words about how IFC is approaching gender equality, increasing gender equality. We take a multifaceted approach, working on gender-smart business solutions with our client companies in developing markets. And so these are solutions that generate opportunities for women and also contribute to the bottom line. We prioritize gender balance in our own investments. And as of December 2020, 49% of our nominee directors appointed to boards of client companies were women. We're now well on track to reach gender parity in director nominations ahead of our 2030 corporate target. We also leverage our relationship with over 2,000 financial institutions and private equity funds to expand access to finance for female entrepreneurs. We work with stock exchanges to improve diversity in listed companies, and more on that in a second. And we work with regulators to develop corporate governance codes that incorporate diversity considerations. These are just two examples of IFC investee companies that we have worked with to improve gender parity in their leadership teams. The first is Interloop Pakistan, a garment company that has promoted gender parity in their leadership, and Bluebird Group in Indonesia, a transport company that we worked with there, also with strong representation in their senior management teams. And this slide just shows a program that IFC has developed called Women on Boards and in Corporate Leadership. And this program promotes building the pipeline of female talent for boards and senior management through a transformative training. And to date, this program has trained more than 500 women in 15 countries. Because, of course, this is an event with HKEX, I wanted to touch on what exchanges can do to promote gender equality. Now, stock exchanges are formidable allies to facilitate gender equitable economic opportunities. And when we work with them, IFC recommends that exchanges do a couple of things. The first thing is require and standardize ESG reporting, adopt listing rules related to board diversity and disclosure, support diversity initiatives for listed company boards, prioritize their own internal diversity, which HKEX has done remarkably well, and increase standardized disclosure of internal practices. A couple of examples of how we have worked with exchanges in the Asia region and beyond. In Asia, we've worked with Vietnam, India, Indonesia, Laos, and the Philippines exchanges. And in Sri Lanka, the Colombo Stock Exchange collaborated with IFC to produce a directory of women board directors in their listed companies. And we completed research that demonstrated, again, the connection between gender diverse boards and higher return on equity and higher return on total assets. So stock exchanges are uniquely positioned to influence their home markets, the companies, investors, and policymakers in a way that few other actors can. Changes in ESG disclosure and diversity requirements at the level of the exchange, particularly one as influential as HKEX, can go a long way towards advancing gender equality and diversity. IFC has demonstrated that this can be done in markets as diverse as Kazakhstan, Brazil, and Sri Lanka, and we look forward to continuing our efforts with other countries, companies, and exchanges globally to advance this important agenda. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. I look forward to hearing from the panelists today and to an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, HKEX. Now, we would like to get into some more in-depth discussions with our panel on diversity in action. In the panel discussion, Ms. Clara Chen, CEO of 𝗙cie Group, and Mr. 𝗙cie𝗹𝗹ល់, Senior Partner, Financial Services, Asia Pacific, Ernst & Young, will join HKEX to explore practical ways for achieving and managing a diverse board. To introduce, Clara is the Chief Executive Officer of 𝗙cie Group, a member of 𝗙cie Holdings Limited. With over 20 years of experience in the non-ferrous metals industry, she has been leading the group in business development and providing strategic directions. She is also a member of the Listing Committee of the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong Limited, a member of the Lead and Zinc Committee of the London Metals Exchange, and a member of the Board Risk Committee of LME Clear Limited. Another panelist, Keith, is the Global Assurance Leader for Banking and Capital Markets at EY, and the founder and former Regional Managing Partner of the Asia Pacific Financial Services Practice of EY. He is also the EY representative on the Bank Working Group of the Global Public Policy Committee of the 6 large international account networks. He has been a Deputy Chairman of the Listing Committee of the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong Limited since 2020 and a member since 2016. Now, I would like to invite the moderator of this panel, Ms. Catherine Ng, Managing Director, Chief Operating Officer, and Head of Secretariat Services, Listing HKEX. Throughout the discussion, please feel free to share with us any thoughts or questions you may have on board diversity using the Q&A tab on the right-hand side. Without further ado, let's start today's panel discussion. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you. Today we've heard a lot about diversity from our chairman, Laura, and also from Bonnie. She's explained our latest corporate governance consultation and the direction of travel in terms of where the regulation is going in the next couple of years. So that's set the scene for our discussion today. And we've heard the benefits of why we need diversity. We've heard from Hester just now where kind of the international community is going on the subject of diversity. Now, I think I want to bring it back down a bit to a more practical level at this panel discussion and talk about, how do we actually achieve it? We've now all agreed, more or less, the entire community has agreed that diversity is a good thing. How do we get there and how do we put it into practice? So I think I'll start with Clara, who's closest to me. I think I'd like to ask her, she runs a very successful listed company in Hong Kong. And could you perhaps share with us your experience on the implementation of diversity across your boardroom and also your workforce? And I'm sure it comes with a lot of challenges. So I think we'll like to hear from you how you overcome those challenges. And what are the highlights that you found so far?
Thank you, Catherine. In our company, we have a very strong focus on skill sets and experience in our recruitment process. So in our board, 1/3 of our board members are female, and on the workforce level, the gender diversity is around 60-40. So from my experience, we found that the diversity mindset has to start from the senior management or at the board level. And then it has to be, the whole organizations need to understand the purpose. And we need to have an agreement and also to have the same targets to work towards the diversity. And by doing so, we do have a lot of trainings throughout the company to make sure that our understanding, our targets are all in line. So, there has been a very long journey to communicate, to exchange ideas and all that. The challenges that we found along the way is that some of our jobs may not be able to meet the diversity target in a short period of time, but it takes quite a long process to do so, and we have to make some adjustment along the way. But I found that when we walk through all the journeys, that the benefits of having different views and experience does help us to have a lot of ideas, especially in the decision-making process. And I found that it's actually helped a lot to make the companies more innovative. So throughout the in my job, I also talk to many companies, and the topics sometimes is around diversities in the organizations, and there are some challenges that I found that some companies may have, and my observations is that there are sometimes is the support from the board and also the senior management are very important. Whether the message is clearly communicated, whether they have giving enough motivations to make the change is also important. Because sometimes companies will view that diversity is a costly process. Maybe it add on additional costs, or they don't see the benefit in the short term. But I think that the companies need to plan at its own pace. And at the end, I think that having a diverse views and experience in the whole organizations would help to foster a better decision-making process and will help to build a more cohesive organizations.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we'll move to the far side, Keith. You are a very strong advocate for diversity, and your firm also supports it. We know you're kind of very much involved with the 30% group discussion. Could you share with us your observations regarding the general attitudes of companies in Hong Kong towards diversity of board and the workforce? How do people view diversity from the outside?
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. And obviously, firstly, thank you to the Exchange for holding this event. Obviously, very excited about the additional impetus that the Exchange is putting around this agenda. So that's very exciting stuff. In terms of the specific questions, I think there are really two questions here. One was around attitudes here in Hong Kong in the community. And I think Clara started to touch on that in terms of some of the changing attitudes that are going on. I think what we've been seeing over the last few years is really that most organizations and most companies see that there's a certain certainty and inevitability about this journey that is occurring. And hopefully I think that most people see the benefits and rationale for this. I know that there are still a lot of discussions. Clara alluded to a discussion about cost and also about the connection to those benefits and necessarily seeing the immediate linkages. But I think a lot of organizations are recognizing that to maximize the value of their company, to get the most out of the resources they have, to get the best input into their judgments and decisions that they made, they need a diverse board. They need a diverse workforce that can work together to bring those results. So the question, I think, in the marketplace has changed away from, should we or should not, is diversity in the boardroom a good thing or not, to very much the questions about the how. The challenges of change and the challenges of making this a reality. How do you actually implement change? How do you bring diversity to the boardroom? And how do you bring a more balanced level of diversity to the workforce? So if I sort of switch channel and move to the second question, which was really about the how do you do this at a corporate level. I think there are really two ways or two components to this. One is around process and one is around behaviors. If we step back from diversity per se, diversity is really an output. It's something that is the impact of more equality and also more inclusiveness in the workplace. So if you have a more equitable environment, you have a more inclusive environment, then that obviously supports and brings diversity. It makes it sustainable to have diversity in the workplace. So come back to metrics. Now, I'm an accountant, and I've always been told that if you want to change something, you need to measure it. So where do you start? You start with processes that help you to quantify and to measure the level of diversity, how you're doing, potentially on gender and on other metrics that you would like to focus on in your organization, and whether that's at the board level, it's at senior management, or it's throughout the whole workforce. This is an important first step. And you will have seen in our consultation paper, hopefully, that this is one of the things that we're looking for businesses to do. Once you've got those processes that help you identify and measure, i.e. focus on a particular topic, the next area is really the behaviors. What do you do with that information? How do you act differently? And I think what we found at EY, and I think many have found this across the business community, is you need a mindset of inclusiveness, inclusive leadership. Whenever you're making an appointment decision, a promotion decision, an evaluation decision, are you giving a fair share of mind and thought to all the opportunities, to all the permutations, the different approaches you could have? So when you're looking to promote people, are you saying, I've got a panel of people, but have I got an inclusive panel? Have I thought about the different potential candidates I could have on this list? And as Clara was saying, it's very much, it starts at the top. You have visions, you have leadership, you set the tone from the top, but you also drive these behaviors down through the organization to create an inclusive organization. Inclusive organization, as I say, will help lead, support, and sustain a diverse organization. Let me pause there.
Thank you, Keith. That was very, very helpful. I think a lot of fruitful thoughts for our companies and investors out there. Now I'll turn over to Hester. IFC has done a number of studies on gender diversity. From an institutional point of view, I would like to understand a bit more about what are the drivers of diversity. And we know, cultural and demographical settings have a huge role to play in terms of diversity. And in Asia, it's probably fair to say that we're culturally, a lot of the cities are more culturally and ethnically homogeneous compared to our counterparts in the Western world. So what are your advice to Asian corporates on, the uniqueness we face with our surrounding, and how can they embrace diversity given the setting that we're faced with in Asia?
Thank you. That's an interesting question, and I'll be referring back to what Keith has just said, I think, in my own answer. So IFC works with companies all over the world to try to build leadership, women's leadership in the companies that we work with at various levels of the organization, whether that's in the senior management team or in the board of directors. And we've found consistently the drivers of diversity are the same ones that Keith mentioned, many of them. And that goes across cultures and across contexts and sectors. First of all, you need a visible and vocal commitment by the management team and ownership of the inclusivity and the diversity agenda by senior management. Without that, you cannot have the culture created within the organization that you need, that is an inclusive culture where people feel comfortable being themselves at work. They feel that they have the ability to bring their best selves and offer their ideas and their thinking in a safe way. We've also found that you have to have a robust set of policies and procedures in place to make sure that the culture actually has some framework behind it. You need to have pay equity institutionalized. You need to have fair recruitment, promotion, and retention policies for employees. And I think we have to deploy technology in an intelligent way, because actually the advances that have been made in technology are actually quite supportive of diversity and inclusion initiatives. And that goes across the board. I think one thing that I wanted to pick up from what Keith said is the importance of data and collecting good data, knowing who your employees are, who your customers are, who your clients are. Without good, robust data and transparent data, you cannot make good decisions about diversity and inclusion in your company. Now, to come to your question about Asian firms in particular, and the particular cultural context that exist here, I suppose first I would just want to say that, again, board diversity or diverse leadership teams, this is an issue that is faced even in the most ethnically, I would say, diverse cultures. You have problems with homogenous looking leadership at the top. So it's not specific to Asia. But I think when leaders in companies here want to promote diversity, inclusion, and agenda in their companies, they have to return to the business case. This is something that they can go to that I think from a cultural standpoint cannot be sort of argued against. It's great for the bottom line. Having a diverse leadership, having diverse teams leads to innovation, as Clara said, better decision making, better risk management, and this is something that translates across the board in business.
Thank you. And I think maybe the next question, I'll address it to all three of you, whoever kind of feel that you'd like to answer, please chime in. I think we've talked a bit about diversity. Gender is probably the first diversity aspect that comes into mind when companies think about diversity, but it's not by no means the only one. It's one that's easy to measure, that's why people have gone there. But how about, diversity extends beyond gender. There's cultural diversity, ability diversity, expertise, experience, and all that. How do companies start implementing their diversity policy and diversity goals when we're dealing with less measurable aspects of diversity? Should we start with a professional advisor?
Sure. No, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and I think for companies, it's not just about the demographic issues. I think you touched on it very, very well, Catherine, in terms of the skill sets. So, obviously, would start with boards thinking about how do they bring the right balance of skills to their company. So we usually would start with a skills matrix, just thinking about, what are the specific things you want. And, if you go back 20, 25, 30 years ago, that would probably be a relatively narrow set of things that were being discussed. It was about, you probably had a finance person, you probably had a lawyer of some shape. You'd have someone who would understand the business operations of the organization. I think, leapfrog to today, I think it's a very different agenda. There's clearly, technology everywhere. So, thinking through technology. There's obviously a focus on the culture of the organization. How do you get the right balance of culture and inclusion in the organization? There's a need to be close and in proximity to the markets that you're aiming to serve. So if you're a wide-based, geographically wide-based organization, do you understand the marketplaces in which you're involved? And so how do you build the connectivity from the board through to that base below? So again, quite a complex piece of work to understand, who you are as an organization and what the right sorts of skills that would make up that organization or board would be built of. So I think that's really where I'd start from. The specific diverse nature of those individuals, I think, is a combination with these other factors. I don't think you'd necessarily need to have one person of a particular demographic fit a particular space. I think it's more what are the skills, and then who are the great people that you can find who will work with you on your board.
Thank you. Let's bring the discussion back to today and maybe a bit more of a real life example. We've had COVID for the last year and a half now, and it's affected a lot of the companies. There's an argument that a diverse board will help companies become more sustainable because they have more diversity of thought, diverse thoughts, and they'll be able to manage the risk of the companies better. Maybe I'll turn this to Hester. Based on the research that you've been doing, has the progress of diversity slowed down or hastened during this crisis? And as we gradually move out of the crisis, what steps can we take to further our diversity agenda in order to rebuild the economies and the companies?
So I'll talk specifically about gender diversity in my answer, because this is where IFC has looked, I think, most extensively, particularly in the context of COVID and then the post-COVID recovery. But I think, as you've heard here today, gender diversity is really a proxy for all kinds of diversity. We're talking about different kinds of ideas that get shared in the room rather than just a single notion or a single approach. So the pandemic, of course, as I mentioned in my presentation, has been it's been a setback for advances in gender equality, and that applies to women across income scales and across geographies. It's been particularly hard for poor women and those working in the informal sector or those in caretaking roles. I think recovery from COVID, the advice that we give to the firms that we work with, and again, across sectors and in emerging markets, but I think you can apply these lessons also to developed markets. We have the opportunity to do things differently in the recovery phase than we've done before. And so when companies are thinking about building back better or a green rebuild post-COVID, they can start to think about how to incorporate diversity strategies in their operations and in their management. For women, that can mean things like incorporating some of the practices like paid childcare. Sorry, not paid childcare. Employer-sponsored childcare. It can be something as simple as increasing I guess gathering lessons from women who have managed businesses through the crisis and trying to understand what their approaches were that worked well. Providing in better financial inclusion for women, entrepreneurs or women as consumers. And finding ways to address and prevent gender-based violence. Actually, this is an issue for corporations as well as for individuals. And finally, adopting some of the actionable strategies on diversity that I mentioned earlier, which again, apply across the board and not just to women.
Thank you. Let's have a bit of a discussion about our latest corporate governance consultation. The Stock Exchange published it 2 weeks ago. It's still in its consultation phases. And the consultation will end at the end of June. There's been quite a lot of discussion in the market and the community on the proposals of the consultation. One of the things, or a couple of things that we are proposing is that we are asking the boards to refresh their boards if necessary, if appropriate. We're asking the boards to reassess their board composition. And we are asking that every single company should have a female on their board in the next 3 years. So we're expecting quite a lot of board directorship movements in the next couple of years. So from a practical perspective, how do you suggest that, where do the companies find the talent? What is the practical solution? I mean, a lot of the companies will say, yes, this is a great idea, but in reality, where will the talent come from? Keith, maybe we start with you.
Okay, thank you. Clearly this is a hot topic in the market, and it's actually great to see that we are having this discussion and getting on with actually moving forward the agenda here. So to answer your question, I think there are two parts. One is, does the talent exist? And I think the answer to that question is very clear in my mind. The answer is clearly yes. Just by way of example, I'm an accountant by training, and nearly a decade ago we passed parity in terms of qualified accountants here in Hong Kong. So there are now far more female qualified accountants than there are male accountants. I'm led to believe the legal profession very much in the same place. If you look to our universities, for a very long period of time, we've had more females coming out of universities than males. I think, also if you look across middle management and senior management, we're seeing increasingly large numbers of female leadership. Here at the Exchange, we have a sizable number of female leaders, for example, and that's leading to real skills coming through as well, obviously. I think the second element to the question is really, okay, so there's a talent pool there. How do you connect with that talent pool? And I think this takes a number of forms in terms of activity. Obviously, in our consultation paper, we talk about the role of a nomination committee. And ideally, that nomination committee will get appropriate support. And in some situations, I realize there's a cost element here, but reach out to professional help, headhunters and otherwise, who are set up to do this. They understand where talent pools are, they understand how to run a diverse process, how to look for the appropriate talent, reflect on those skills matrices that I pointed out early to find the right sort of skills that you're looking for as an organization to build that refreshed and diverse board. But that is just one route. Obviously, other things the nomination committee can do is do the normal things you've been doing historically when you've been looking to find directors. You use networks, you look at similar organizations, you understand people in your community, and you try and reach out and, as I said before, use an inclusive mindset that you think about where all the possible alternatives are. Don't give up at the first choice, but keep thinking and thinking about where these potential opportunities lie. If you look at where we are at the moment in Hong Kong, and this isn't, personally, I don't think we should be proud of this. We have about 13% female board directors. Your average board, the smallest size of your average board in Hong Kong is about 6 directors. So to get to the very lowly target, and I say a very lowly target of having not a single gender board, i.e. in most cases that means having at least one female on the board, is a move up to a 6th. That's just shy of 17%. So when people talk about this massive gap, this skills gap, where does it come from? I think we need to put this into perspective. We're not talking an enormous shift in society that is going to require overboarding by a few females to make up the numbers here. That's not where we're going here. What we're looking to do is to create a real basis of broad-based experience and skills across the marketplace. With the 30% view, historically, one thing we've tried to do is talk to big corporates and encourage them where they have subsidiary boards to make sure that they're having diverse leadership in those situations as well. Because with those subsidiaries, people can get great skills training and experience ahead of moving on to full main board, or in our instance, main board and GEM board opportunities. So again, if you do have subsidiaries, please think through how you can utilize those to build a pipeline of board experienced individuals as well. So it comes back to where we were before. It's about the data sets, it's about building up your own workforce, building up diversity and opportunities in your workforce, and supporting others in doing that so that we have a deep pool of talent to make this happen.
Thank you. Given the statistics that you just quoted, about 13% of women on board, there are a lot of companies that haven't quite met the diversity requirement of the boards yet. So these companies need to put in place a plan, some measurable objectives on how they will get there in the future. I mean, by measurable objectives, we're not looking at just some narrative, you know, I'll try to do my best, you will try to find a woman to sit on the board. We're actually looking for numeric targets. Now, Clara, you run a listed company, and you run a listed company with a very diverse board. How would you, what would your recommendations be to companies which currently only have a single gender board? How do they put in place, I mean, getting a diverse board is not going to happen overnight, you know. They need to plan it, they need to find the right talent. What advice would you give these single gender board companies on the path to achieving diversity?
That's very true, that diversity doesn't happen overnight. So the senior management or the board need to think about where the companies wants to go. Where is your market? How do you want to expand it in the next few years? And then starting from there, on the board levels, at the nomination committees, we set the policy. And on the workforce level, there's the HR policy. And once the policy is set, the target is set, and then we'll keep monitoring the changes in the market and the feedback, and also we do a review session, and if and also some interim reviews that do we need to make adjustment on the targets or the timelines, and then report regularly. I think that like every other policies, that it's the diversity policy is a very long-term view of how the leaderships wants to plan the vision of the company. So where does it want to go? And so such as when we talk about that, when we face with crisis, that the companies may be very busy in handling the current problems or issues, and then maybe put other policies aside. So my experience is that we have to plan ahead, and then the diversity policies and also the targets will help the companies to face with those crises or the challenges in a more resilient and agile way. And I also want to go back to Keith's comments earlier that nowadays technologies does help a lot, and also we keep data in the companies, and all this will go back to the system that we constantly review against our targets and make adjustment along the way.
Thank you. That was very helpful. I think we've got about 12 minutes left, so I'll go to the questions. I've received a lot of questions from our audience today, so thank you for participating. Do send us more questions if you have. One of the questions is, you know, whenever we have a discussion around diversity, people always bring up tokenism. How worried should we be about tokenism when we are asking for a non-single gender board? Perhaps I could ask Keith, who is the chairman of our subcommittee on corporate governance and ESG, to answer this question.
Sure, thanks, Catherine. Well, I would say this to people to start off with. It's your board. You'll get the most out of your board if you put the right people together for the right reasons. If you see this as a compliance process, you know, you might get lucky and get the right outcome, but I don't think you're entering into it with the best interests of the company in mind necessarily. So I thoroughly encourage people to not see this as a form of tokenism in any way whatsoever. You know, I think you owe a duty to yourselves and to your shareholders to try and put the best board together to achieve and try and create the right sort of thinking and mindset at the board. I'll stop there, I think.
Clara, any further comments?
I agree with Keith's comments that you it's not only complying with the regulations, but you have to think about what your companies want to do, what's your business, how you want to grow the business, and then you have the group of talents with different backgrounds, expertise to help the company to grow. I think that's the main point. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of our audience is thinking about the future already. So we are working on the new set of corporate governance proposals. There's a lot of discussion internationally on gender diversity of the board and gender diversity of the workforce. Perhaps I could address this question to Hester. People are asking, kind of, what's next? What should we do next? Is it more women? Should we increase, should we set a percentage like what some other countries have done, some European countries have done? Or what are the other aspects? What is next on diversity?
Just as you were asking the question, this statistic that I read came to mind, which was that when the FTSE in London was thinking about quotas for the boards there, they decided actually against imposing quotas because they found that indeed companies were looking at these things as compliance, and they weren't looking at it as a real opportunity. So I think what's next might be maybe a move away from a strict compliance view, as Keith mentioned and Clara confirmed, and more towards looking at this as a real as the business opportunity that it truly is. I know for sure that within the World Bank Group, we are trying to consider all aspects of diversity, beyond gender. We're looking at ethnicity and sexual orientation and gender identity, backgrounds in terms of your education and your economic origin. And it can be confusing and it can be overwhelming for companies to try and incorporate all of this into their thinking. But I guess it's important to come back to basic principles when you think about this. And if you just set up systems in which you're counting and you're getting your data collected in the right way, you're making sure that employees have avenues to voice their concerns and any issues that they have, and they don't fear retribution. And if you set up systems where there's accountability at the senior level, you're going to succeed. So you can, I think, be reassured by a lot of the data that we've shared today that this is really a positive shift for your company. This is something to look forward to and to invest in with sort of a full heart and an open mind.
Thank you. Okay, I think diversity is an issue that many stakeholders in the financial market community is interested in. So there's the companies, there's investors, there are regulators, professionals, and lots of other stakeholders as well. I'm sure kind of, Clara, as you're sitting as the CEO of a company, a lot more kind of institutional investors are approaching you today compared to 10 years ago to talk about your corporate governance, your diversity, and your ESG issues. What's the advice that you can give the audience and your fellow kind of listed companies? How can you prepare yourselves for this conversation? Obviously, you don't want to wait until they knock on your door, but investors are increasingly interested. So how do you deal with these issues? And
my advice will be keep an open mind and plan ahead, and then try to think about how the diversities can help you to grow the business. And then because from my experience is that with the diverse views, backgrounds, and also experience that do help us to give a wider perspectives in the decision-making process and also in shaping the cohesive organization structures. I think that's very helpful, especially nowadays the market changes very fast. And then we have to plan ahead to be prepared. And it's part of the risk management process as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. This question is, I have another question. It's kind of related to diversity, but it's more about alignment of interest and conflict of interest. I think it's one that we've mentioned in the consultation paper, and it's about, in the consultation paper, we asked for succession planning. We want INEDs to be independent. That's a strong theme that's what investors are looking for, and that's best for companies' governance. So someone's asked a question on independence and objectivity of INED. How would the compensation of INED affect their objectivity? And maybe I could ask Keith to answer this question.
Thank you, Catherine. This, I think, is a very difficult question in reality. I think amongst the INED community in Hong Kong, there's a lot of discussion about director compensation. Clearly, independence is actually a state of mind. If the amount of money actually determines your independence, I would argue you probably don't have the right state of mind as to what you bring to the table. And so, it really is, are you going to be objective? Do you think about things in an independently minded way and behave in that way? I think when we come back to the consultation, obviously in the consultation we're talking about the consequences of time served driving the determination of independence. I think some people would argue, and that, as I say, there's a lot of debate in the marketplace here, that time served means you're more experienced, you understand the business better, whereas others would say time served means that you become somewhat stale, somewhat normalized, call it Stockholm syndrome if you wish, that you become so used to the business that you don't challenge and critique anymore. Does that get influenced by the amount of money you get paid? There probably are situations if people are, very well paid that they would be wanting to hang on to their job for financial reasons. But I think there are very few instances of that in Hong Kong in reality. I don't think it is, as I say, I don't think that the money really is the driver for many of the board directors here in Hong Kong in terms of whether they're going to be independent or not. And just stepping slightly to the side of that, when we as a regulator, as the exchange, obviously once in a while we have to investigate certain situations. Obviously, we would look at the independence of INEDs and the way in which they behave, and I think, we would look to the independent directors to be exactly that, to be independent of mind and think and look after the best interests of all the investors, and more broadly, all of the stakeholders in the company as well. So as I say, state of mind, not amount of cash.
Thank you. Okay, there is one question directed at Hester. You mentioned this person's been kind of listening to your speech, and she said, you've said deploying technology in an intelligent way and use robust, transparent data to embrace diversity. She wants to know about can you elaborate on that? How can we use AI? How can we use technology to help company embrace diversity?
So there are probably many more ways that you can use technology to embrace diversity than I will mention here, but I can cite a few. And the first thing that comes to mind is in recruitment. And I think we've all seen the research about blind interviews, blind auditions of various kinds. You can use technology to take away some of the conscious and unconscious bias that interviewers would have when they're looking at candidates. You can use technology in scanning resumes for skills. If you are, instead of looking at, if you're recruiting for a board, for example, and you only look at former CEOs and CFOs, you're looking at titles. But if you use technology and you look for skill sets and competencies instead, you may end up with a much more diverse group of candidates than you would have otherwise. So those are two examples that I can think of off the top of my head. Yeah.
Thank you. I think those are really practical experience. I think very practical examples. We always talk about, finding the right person, finding the right talent, and how do I go about it? is it my friend's friend or outside recruitment, and using those blind interviews sounds like a great idea. We just have kind of 1 minute or so before we need to end this. So maybe each one of you have a takeaway or takeaway, giveaway, suggestion on how company can embrace diversity. Clara?
Diversity helps the companies to have a more diverse mix of views, experience, background in creating a more variable decision-making process and also in shaping a more cohesive organization.
Thank you. Hester?
Yes, I think my takeaway would be, I guess there's two of them for me. One is that this is actually, yes, diversity takes time, but we also have a compelling and urgent imperative to build diversity at a faster clip than we've been doing for the last several decades. The other takeaway, I suppose, is that from the woman that I quoted, 𝗙𝗹𝗹𝗮, is that people build culture and not the other way around. And so we have, at the individual level, at the board level, at the corporate level, at the social level, the responsibility and ability to drive these changes. And so that is what I would leave the group with today.
Thank you. So first thing is embrace change. We are in a fast-moving, changing world. You don't be a slowly boiled frog in a pan. Please sort of embrace the change and move forward. The final thing is become part of the dialogue. And the first way you can do that is to participate in responding to our consultation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the only thing left for me to do now is to thank our excellent panel members here today. I think we've had a really fruitful discussion and we've teased out some of the issues around diversity. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us that's online today. And I hope you had a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing your insights. We have come to the end of our webinar, and once again, we would like to thank all of our guest speakers, as well as our online audience for making today's event such a great success. HKEX is a passionate advocate for board diversity, and we hope today's discussion has inspired you to champion greater diversity in Hong Kong and beyond. We look forward to hosting you at future ESG Academy webinars. Have a good afternoon.